Hello, everybody. I'm just going to make sure that the stream is coming through, and we will get started. Thanks for being patient. I know it was kind of weird seeing the stream will begin soon for like 30 minutes. Not many people would call 30 minutes soon. But, all right, seems to be working. Yeah, audio is working. Okay, cool. All right, welcome everybody. Happy New Year. It's 2018, second day of 2018. So I hope everybody had an awesome couple holidays. And you're ready, if you're like me, you've had enough relaxing, enough food, enough video games, and you're ready to be productive and get back to work. And which would be great if you are, because this class is going to be some work. Hopefully all of us together working towards a common goal. So it's really neat to see some excitement in the chat about the class. I, for one, am super excited about it. I see big potential for classes for CG Cookie. I think it really can prove to be the best way to learn from our content, especially for citizen members. And yeah, so let me see, where do I want to start? About the last stream, I'm sorry if you guys were there and missed, and well, you missed it. You were there, but I missed the stream. We had some technical difficulties, and we're still trying to work that one out. I want to do that stream again with Jonathan Williamson and Jonathan Lampel. We just got to figure out how to do this remote streaming. You know, I guess I don't know how many people do that. A lot of people stream, but you know, we have to stream them coming to me and then me going out. So it's just been a little bit of a headache, but we're trying to work on that. I was really excited about that topic as well, and we're going to do that again in the future. But this class, this event is part of a class. It should be obvious, but it's a new thing that we're trying to do. So unlike other streams, which are a little more general purpose, I try and keep them so that there's something for everybody, whether you're an advanced user or a new user. And this one is going to be very specifically aimed at beginners, specifically interested in modeling. And so it's not quite as general purpose. I'm going to try and keep it focused and maybe spend less time on questions that lead to rabbit trails, which usually I would be totally fine for in other streams. But just going to try and keep this focused for the Blender beginners who are trying to learn through this class. So let's see here. That's enough of my head. Let's go down to this. I'm also using OBS for the first time streaming, so hopefully that's all working and looking good. And all right, so welcome to the first class. I'm probably going to say it a lot, but this is for beginners getting started in 3D modeling. And the first thing that I wanted to do is, well, first invite you to ask questions at any time. That's one of the best parts about this stream format, is that you can ask me directly and I can answer directly. So there's no waiting on a comment reply or anything like that, or a support ticket. So please ask questions throughout the process. Do try and keep it relevant to Blender beginners and modeling. While I might answer, what my favorite band is at the time, I'm going to try and keep things more focused. But yeah, so this class format is new. It's the first time we're doing it. I have huge hopes for it, and all kinds of topics are in store for future classes. If this one's about beginners, but other classes will be for advanced users, intermediate. It's going to be all over the place. It's going to be for all levels. But this is the first one, so it's kind of in beta. Like you probably noticed, there's no official registration or a class site or anything like that. I'm just trying to use what we have now, because the web development side can take, I don't know, months or longer. So I didn't want to wait for that to happen. I wanted to test the format and get the ball rolling. And if you have any questions about the format, please let me know. Basically, in short, it lives on the community thread that I hope you all are aware of. It's stuck to the top of the community page, and it's got the label BC1-1801, which is not a Star Wars droid character from the new trilogy. It's just stands for Blender Class 1, which would be the getting started with 3D and modeling in Blender. And then 2018 month 1, January. So that's all that means. But anywhere that you see that label, it's going to relate to this class. And yeah, having said that, please, fire away at the questions. I did want to first lay a couple ground rules, so to speak, because we have some experienced members here. I see a lot of familiar faces or avatars and usernames who have shown up to a lot of the streams. You've been around CG Cookie for a long time, and you are 100% welcome here. Absolutely. Just because this is a class for beginners doesn't mean, you got to leave or you won't be a benefit here. But I did want to, because I know we have some experienced people, I wanted to lay a couple ground rules. And one of them being, I want this place to be very welcoming for beginners. I know it can be hard sometimes for experienced users to relate back to being a beginner, but I don't want that to hinder any beginners in this class. Sorry, I have something in my eye. I really want people to feel comfortable asking any question. There is no dumb question. There's nothing too beginnerish. And this is also for me as well. I'm going to try very hard not to assume anything. If you ask what's a vertex, that could make me step back, or an experienced user step back and be like, wait, seriously, you don't know what a vertex is? I'm going to fight all those urges and just whatever question there is, it's safe, ask it. I want you to understand everything that goes into Blender in 3D from whatever perspective. Let's see, a question, gotta keep an eye on the chat from Nathan. Will these videos live anywhere like the community page after it streams? Yes, it will. I don't know about on the community page. I guess I could post it there, but where it definitely will live, if I switch tabs over here and you go to events, here in the post events button, that will switch the list from being future streams to being what has already happened, and you can see all of them. We've done a bunch of streams at this point, so check that out. All of them will definitely be posted here, and they'll have the same name with the BC1-1801 prefix, so definitely you can find them there. Let's see, someone's too late? No, it just started. Okay, cool. Okay, so going back to, keeping it a very safe place for beginners. Ask anything that you want. Also for experienced users, try not to flex your knowledge or what you know. That can also, I know from experience, be a temptation. Specifically, I think of like video games where, if you're getting into the game late, like me, I'm getting really into Smash Brothers Melee, and I feel like I can't play anybody online because the game's super old and I haven't earned my right to be there to play or whatever. And it's a silly thing, but there's this attitude of like, you're a noob, like earn your way before you can be one of us. So that's not going to be the case here. And I ask that experienced members, make sure to maintain that. And I've really never seen this attitude on our site from our members, but just wanted, if not to really warn our experienced members, but to remind new people that this is a safe place for you to learn. And then finally, for our experienced members, that's enough things to not do. But what I would request that you do is be a resource for the new people learning, the beginners. Be someone who answers questions, who helps other people out as they learn for the first time. Blender in 3D in general is very hard, and the last thing you need is an unwelcoming community, but a community that is a resource and is easy to get help from, that is going to change the game for beginners learning. These are all things that I wish I had when I was first starting out. So on that note, let's see, what experience levels do we have here? I know we've got some experienced people, but I would love to just get, since we don't have any official thing, once you get the official system built, I'm sure I will ask to you to fill out a form that's like, what is your experience level? And I'll know that ahead of time. But since I don't have that, I'm curious how many beginners we have versus intermediates versus advanced. So if you can just say in the chat, you might be too humble to say I'm an advanced user. So let's say if you've never used Blender, you're a beginner. If you've used Blender for a year, you're intermediate. If you've used Blender for 1 or more years, we'll say that's advanced. So if you don't mind, just please saying that in the chat, because I'm assuming that there are some fresh beginners who want to learn Blender. It's not just experienced people wanting a refresh or something like that. Killzone, I am a noob. Just all right. Well, there you go. Excellent. I guess if there's even just one in here, then I'm going to be able to teach that person. Awesome. Advanced people. This is great. I think it'll be really, really cool to have a wide range of experience, and as long as it's a welcoming community for those beginners. Awesome. That's cool to see that come in. Thanks, guys, for answering that. Okay, great. Call me a noob, LOL. Excellent. All right, well, that served my purpose. I know that we have some beginners in here because we are going to start from the beginning when it comes to computer graphics. So let's start from what is Blender? That is something that we don't necessarily teach explicitly in our content, I don't think. But let's talk about it for a second. Because maybe you stumbled here somehow and you think that this is about creating organic juice mixes or blend juice drinks, juicers or whatever. Anyway, that's a bad Blender joke. So according to blender.org, Blender is the free and open source 3D creation suite. It supports the entirety of the 3D pipeline: modeling, rigging, animation, simulation, rendering, compositing, and motion tracking, even video editing and game creation. Now that makes sense to me after doing this for over 10 years, but when I first got started, the terminology was brand new to me. I didn't even know how to search for it. All I knew is that I wanted to create the cool, beautiful images that I saw in my brother's video games instruction manuals. That's literally where the inspiration came from. And I didn't even know how to search for stuff. I didn't know that that was modeling. That's what beautiful people do for pictures. Rigging, never heard of that. Animation, that's what Disney did with pencils and a bunch of sheets of paper. But like, there's a lot of terminology that is around 3D that can make it even hard to know what you're searching for. And so, well, let's talk about that a little bit and expand on what exactly Blender is used for, in case you're that new to Blender. All right. First thing is, and this isn't everything. I'm not going to cover everything in detail what Blender does because it is a jack of all trades. But I'm going to do the things that most people are probably interested in Blender for. The first one is visual effects, also referred to as VFX often, and it's the stuff that you see in the movies that you watch behind the scenes to catch a glimpse on how they do things. Here we have the Transformer robot, Optimus Prime, and they are completely fake. They were created in the computer, animated, composited with live action. Those robots are 100% computer generated, and that is something Blender can definitely do. We have below that, so in general, like character creation for film, that's an aspect that Blender can do. Simulation, in this, I think this is from 2012 is the screenshot, the movie, and I would bet that nothing in this is actually real. It's all computer generated, from the plane to the smoke to the collapsing buildings. Mind blown at these references. Well, cool. Hopefully it's inspiring, not that kind of mind blownness. But so Blender can also be used to simulate things like smoke and fire and collapsing buildings, things breaking, stuff like that. Blender can do. Full disclosure, it's maybe not the best thing for that, but it can do it. So we'll talk about that later. But it can absolutely, without a doubt, do this kind of Transformers stuff. All right, so the next one is compositing. It's taking live footage of this actor in a boat in like a pool and all this blue screen, ridiculousness. Turn that into Life of Pi, and they're on an ocean all of a sudden, and they've got a tiger in the boat with them, and that is the kind of thing that Blender can do. It can create this imagery that is not actually real, but it can look very convincing. That is the goal with visual effects. Next, animation. In a general sense, stuff like Pixar, all their animated films, completely computer generated, and Blender can totally do that. We have comparable examples with Cosmos Laundromat and other Blender Foundation shorts. So Shrek, DreamWorks movies like this, kind of kids movies, as much as that hurts me to say that. That's what a lot of people outside this art form and business call it, kids movies. Here's a kid's television show that my son watches. Like Blender could easily create that. And then, so animation is a huge one. And then the last big one is game asset creation. So games are a huge industry. They're super fun. We all play games. And Blender, notice that I say game asset creation, not game making or game development. Game asset creation is creating the beautiful stuff in games. It's creating the models. It's creating the textures. All the visual aspects of a game, whereas the development side, the coding and the underlying structures that make the game function, while Blender does have a game engine, it's not necessarily up to par with other software, so not too many people use it for that. Here's an example of, to my knowledge, the only, I think they would call it failed Blender Foundation project. It was a video game called Yo Frankie, and they made some progress on it, but it never became a complete game to my knowledge. And if I'm wrong about that, let me know in the chat. But the game engine is cool and it's fun that it's there, but it's not really what I'm talking about with game asset creation. Blender is absolutely used at big studios for creating professional game assets. So that is something that Blender is perfect for, and it can do a lot of other stuff beyond those three big things. In the upper left, this is the video sequence editor, so you can literally cut and edit video as if it were Final Cut or iMovie or Windows Movie Maker. I don't really know what's the latest and greatest video editor anymore, but it can do that. It can do 2D animation, kind of like Flash, but that's a new system. That's only been around for in its current grease pencil impressiveness, has only been around for a couple years, and it's just amazing what 2D animators are being able to do with that. So I think this personally is going to change a lot, and that's the upper right image. I realize you can't see my mouse, but so 2D animation is really up and coming with Blender. And then bottom left, that's motion tracking. I think that's impressive because, to my knowledge, only outside software does motion tracking. I don't know if I've seen motion tracking built into a 3D package like this, and it does it quite well. So that's pretty awesome. Also, 3D printing. That's a big upcoming industry and interest of people who's getting into Blender. Here's an example of a 3D model on the left side of the image, and it's been printed. So that is another great thing that Blender can do: build stuff in the computer, export it to a printer software, have it printed. So Blender is without a doubt a jack of many trades, and with that, you have to admit that it's not a master of all of them. But with modeling especially, I think it's a master full software. I don't think any other app can really say that it's not up to par. Some apps might have some better tools or whatever, but as a professional modeler who's used Mudbox, Maya, ZBrush, and 3ds Max, I would say from experience, it is a very, very good modeling package. I do all my texture painting there. It's no substance, but it handles texture painting very well as well. Also, and then rendering, shader creation, like Cycles, is just it's amazing. So very, very awesome software Blender is, and it's pretty good at a lot of what it does. So all right, another key aspect of Blender is that it's free and open source. You're not paying thousands of dollars per year for the right to use this software. It costs you nothing to download. It costs you nothing to install. It costs you nothing to use. It costs you nothing to sell what you make with Blender. You make models and you want to sell them on TurboSquid or the Blender market. You don't owe Blender or the Foundation anything. So having said that, it's one of the only softwares that's motivated by this awesome community, this awesome philosophy of open source. And it's also, there's a lot of open source software, and not a lot of it is good. So it's an exception, in my opinion, in my experience with open source software, that Blender stands as a profound example of the best thing that open source can be. And it's an amazing software. So having said that, there is a developmental fund that, you know, Blender is not actually free. It didn't appear from Zeus or something as a gift to mankind. It costs a lot of time to build Blender over the years, over the decades at this point. And so that's not free. The developers, the full-time developers are absolutely paid as they should be. And that is based on donations and grants. And so, you know, if you get into Blender, if you end up using it, I strongly recommend that you consider donating to the dev fund and giving back. So having said that, now we can kind of get to the class and what we're going to be doing in the class this week, at least. And something, again, that we have not talked about in our pre-recorded content is, how do I get Blender? To my knowledge, we don't have a how to install Blender video anywhere on our site, which is one of the assumptions that we've made is people can figure out how to download it. And while that might be true, I'm going to start really fresh and just show you how to download and install Blender. Yeah, so if we have any questions, I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat. I don't see any question marks. I see comments and stuff, but awesome. It looks like I've not missed anything. Oh, okay, we do have one from Tomaz. Better use Unity or Unreal for that? Yes, I think you're referencing the game development part. We teach Unity as part of the game development curriculum at CG Cookie. And yeah, we teach that as far as the underlying game developmental structure, all the coding and putting the game together in a functional piece. But we do teach creating assets with Blender. Oh, awesome. You can download Blender on Steam. I didn't know that. Or did I know that? Maybe I'd known that, but I'd forgotten about it. I've never done it that way, but that is pretty cool. If I remember correctly, Steam is made and maintained by Valve, and Valve has an amazing relationship with Blender. They were, at one time, one of the biggest contributors to the developmental fund. So that doesn't surprise me at all that Steam would support Blender downloading. So the way that I download Blender, I type in Blender. I do this every time a new release comes out. I type in Blender download into Google and go straight to that first entry, which is the Blender download page on blender.org. And from here, this is where you get the official version of Blender. You can get all kinds of unofficial versions of Blender elsewhere with people experimenting with different types of things. But this is where I go to the source to get what they call trunk Blender, which is a reference, I believe, to a tree. So like the tree trunk is the source, like the original, and then there are branches of Blender where people experiment and people have the right to do that. It's one of the beautiful things about it. But here's where I go to get the source, and it's pretty smart. If you hit download Blender, it's going to detect your operating system. It's downloading now at this point. And then something that I realized is I'm going to have to show you my Finder. I'm going to create a window for that in OBS. Let me do that real quick. Window capture, Finder. And let's see here. Sorry, bear with me, because once you download it, you need to know what to do with it in the Finder. Okay, great. Let me just set that up. Let's see. Where is the Finder? Try this again. Finder. There it is. Excellent. See all my screenshots. Okay. So when you download a version of Blender, did I let that finish? Yeah, okay, I did. So what you're going to do is, so you've downloaded the file, pardon me. You've downloaded the file and you need to unzip it. Blender is a little bit unique in that you're not going to necessarily get an application install file, you know, where you like click a button and it runs through the setup. Most software does that, but Blender is unique in that you literally unzip it and it's ready to use. So in my downloads, let me go there. So in my downloads, I've got, it doesn't matter where you put Blender. If you just double click on it and unzip it, take a moment to do that. It is kind of crazy that Blender fits in 144.2 megabytes. Once you get into Blender and realize how expansive of a program that it is, That is pretty crazy, especially when Maya and stuff. I remember it coming on multiple CDs and all kinds of gigabytes involved, but not Blender. All right, so I've unzipped it. Let me go find where that is. And it's right here. You go into that file and you can literally run Blender from right here, the executable. Now that, if I recall, I'm on OS X, I'm on Windows, Mac, but so I'm not gonna be able to show you this on Windows or Linux, but it's pretty much the same on those other platforms, those operating systems. So once you unzip it, it's ready to go. Just double click on this and you're ready. So this is kind of how I go about it. It's a very basic way to download and install Blender. You can set up all kinds of craziness. Oh no, I never transitioned. I'm sorry, I kept talking. I never transitioned to what I was actually showing. So let me do that real quick. In the downloads, let's see. Here was my Blender downloaded file. Just double clicked it. It created this. Inside that directory, you can double click on the application file or the executable, and you're ready to go. Sorry about that. Yeah, okay, question. Thank you, Jonathan Lampel, for being in the chat and helping me out. Do you normally keep multiple versions of Blender? Okay, so yeah, I was gonna go into, there's a lot of ways to go about having Blender. I think Jonathan Williamson has it set up to where he sources the GitHub, and like either every day or every week or something, he builds a brand new version of Blender, the newest version of Blender, even the experimental builds, so that he is super up to date. Now, people do that. I personally don't do that. Because sometimes they can include something into the new, experimental build that breaks something, and I don't like that possibility. So I just download the trunk and I stick with it until the new version comes out. But I used to also get my, let's see, I haven't done that in a long time, but I used to get my experimental builds of Blender from, what was it called? It's a big famous one. Download, what was that called? Oh, Graphic All, that's what it was. Graphic All. Now this is where you can find a lot of very fun experimental branches, which are, it's a very reliable place to get that. I used to get Blender from there. Now I just get it from Trunk. And anyway, so the way that I personally handle Blender, if I go to my Blender directory, applications, let me hide. Okay, never mind. Yeah, you're seeing that. Okay. That's not where it is. Macintosh, applications, Blender. So I do keep multiple versions of Blender open. I've deleted a lot of them recently, but I have a 2.78 version, 2.78 record, because I like to customize my Blender, but when I record, I try and keep that stock. And so I do keep multiple versions. Sometimes I've needed to revert back. There's a couple tools with modeling that changed several versions ago, and sometimes I prefer the old version, and I'll just jump back, open my file with the older version of Blender, and go from there. So I do maintain, some older versions, but just, name it kind of simply for me. Oh no, the stream stopped. Let's see. That's no good. Let me make sure that the stream has not stopped. I'll refresh the page real quick. Okay, so I'm seeing a couple people say the screen stopped. Okay, it just got working? Okay. All right, thanks for letting me know. I'll try and keep an eye on that. It seems to be working for me, but I don't know about what happened in Europe. Okay, just a hiccup. All right, cool. Making me nervous. The stream that failed a couple weeks ago, that was profoundly humbling to me, I guess. I kept thinking, like, the show must go on. I've known that phrase my whole life, but like, I really felt it then. If people are expecting this show, you can't miss it. Anyway, so that's what I do with Blender. Now that we've got it installed, I think if you have any questions about installation, let me know, but it should be pretty straightforward. Download the file, unzip it, and you can put that anywhere that you want. Just click on the executable. Now that we have it installed, let's go back to, let's see, turn off my Finder. How do I get Blender? Okay, we've done that. Excellent. Sometimes it's nice to use an older version. Oh, older tutorials. Yes, thank you for that. One of the frustrations about having pre-recorded content is the moment you release a version of your course that, you know, if I recorded a course for like 3 months, as soon as it's released, it starts to age because the new version of Blender is coming or a new feature is added, and so what we have started telling people is that, or our members, is to use the version of Blender. If you're having confusion, use the version of Blender that the video was recorded with, because even though the software changes, like the core underlying principles that are taught, that rarely changes. If it is a big change, you know, some tool is released that makes another technique completely obsolete. That doesn't happen very often. We will re-record it, but it's too hard to re-record stuff when 99% of the material you're teaching is exactly the same. You're just re-recording it with a new version of Blender that will immediately start to age once you release it. So it's a big moving target, and actually this class is one of the ways that we're trying to combat that. But anyway, using an older version of Blender comes in handy for that. Another reason to keep multiple around. All right, so now to somewhat the meat and potatoes of the course. First time with Blender. You've downloaded it, you've installed it, you open it up for the first time, and you're probably overwhelmed. If you're like me, Blender is such an expansive program that it's overwhelming. The number of buttons, the number of tools, and the names involved, and the concepts, and navigating around the viewport. It can be very overwhelming, and it was for me when I first started. And without resources, I was just, oh gosh, it was a painful process trying to learn how to do things. And that's common. If you've had that experience, that is totally common. Part of the reason I wanted to do this class for beginners is to somewhat give you a hand to hold if you need it, so that you don't have to be so discouraged. You can have someone to ask, and I can hopefully help you through that, and the experienced users here can do that as well. But let's see. So this is week 1 of this course, and of this class, and we're trying to leave you not discouraged or overwhelmed. The dreaded box of Blender. I'm looking at some of the chat. I do like that we have. Can you use new Blender files with older versions? Yes, to my knowledge, I can't recall a time where I've ever not been able to open a newer file with an older version of Blender. I've done that frequently, and it's never been a problem. I don't think you can. I don't know. Someone correct me. I don't think. Okay, Lampel is answering. Okay, sure. If you use a modifier or a certain tool that doesn't exist in the older version, there will be a problem there. But I don't think it's ever. I don't think it will not let you open the file. Like with Maya, I remember you install one version newer and you try to open in the older version and you get this big warning and it like won't do it. You have to turn off something, or I don't know. It's been a while since I used Maya, but it was a pain. It was dangerous to upgrade, and that's not really the case with Blender. It's a super flexible software. All right, so week 1, let's talk about what we're doing in week 1. Two major things. I want you to watch, beginners, I want you to watch the Blender Basics course. It is a really, really good course made by Jonathan Williamson, and it guides you through the essentials of Blender, from the viewport, navigating around, object interaction, and just the crucial things to get you started. So watch that. It's a short course. I'll show you where to find that real quick. We go over here to Blender, and it's in Learning Flows, the first one, Introduction to Blender, and that's the first course right here, Blender Basics. You can also search for it if you want, Blender Basics. Search for that, and here it is right here, Course Blender Basics. So if we look at that one, let's see, it's only 6 videos, all of them less than 10 minutes. So it won't take you long to get through the videos, but I think it could take you all week to really get comfortable with what's being taught in those videos. So that's your assignment for the week in terms of consuming our pre-recorded content. learning from that. And then the homework is to create a scene out of primitive shapes. Now, if we look at the community thread, I posted an image of what I mean by this. And that's actually what I'm going to be doing in demoing in this for the next, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes or so, is how to create a scene like this. Super simple, but it's maybe not the beautiful image that inspired you to learn Blender in the first place, but it's going to teach you and get you comfortable with key things that once you are comfortable, it makes learning the skills much easier. Like me, I remember I was pretty much by myself trying to learn 3D Studio Max when I first got started, and I was trying to learn how to use the software along with how to do the skills, how to learn modeling skills, and they constantly fought with each other. I taught myself really, really bad techniques that had to be forgotten and relearned. So what I'm trying to teach you in this class is we're going to start off with the software, just getting comfortable with it. And then next week and the weeks after, we're going to, build off of our comfortability and familiarity and actually start learning some skills. So this week is just getting comfortable with the software. And in this stream, I'm going to demonstrate sort of getting into Blender for the first time, reminiscing about what it was like for me, and hopefully give you a point of reference if you're starting there similarly, but then also how to do object orientation, navigate around the viewport. So that's the demo that we're going to do in this stream. Create a scene out of primitive shapes, I believe. Okay, yeah. So that's where we're going to leave the presentation, and we're going to get into Blender. Again, please ask any questions, especially beginners. I really hope I'm not missing any. I don't think so. Having Lampel in the chat is very helpful for that kind of thing. But, if you've got any questions, beginners, this is your opportunity. I guess I keep saying that because I feel like you got to have a bunch. If you're like me, I wanted to know what everything was. I had, even the terminology was bizarre. So ask questions, and we're going to get right into Blender now. Let's turn off, let's see. Here we go. All right. Here we have Blender open for the first time. And just so that I'm sure, let's go to Load Factory Settings. There we go. This is officially the brand new, what you should be seeing when getting into Blender. I see Killzone saying, I'm scared. So Killzone, I'm curious, do you have experience with any other 3D software, or is Blender your first exposure to, and for anyone else, is it your first exposure to 3D as well as just Blender itself? Because I came from Blender having other experience. And so I kind of knew when you're transitioning from other software, I kind of knew what I needed. I knew what tools could do. I just needed to learn what they called them in Blender and where to find them. But starting out, you don't even know what tools you need. And so it's a big learning curve when it comes to learning Blender or any 3D package from the very beginning. As Mark says, crawl before crawl before walk, and then walk before run. Absolutely. It can be difficult because you got into Blender because you saw awesome artwork or you saw an awesome movie and you want to create that cool stuff. But that's just going to come with time. 3D is kind of recreating reality in a lot of respects. And reality is complex. So, it takes effort. It takes a lot of practice. So Devon tried Maya in the Art Institute. Okay, so you've been exposed to Maya, maybe some of those concepts. Coming to Blender, that'll be a little easier for you, and that's great. So I think it's Car Hunter. Is it Char Hunter? I think of Character Hunter, but maybe that's not. Maybe your name is Char or Car. So you dabble with Maya and Softimage before Blender. Softimage, excellent. That's kind of an oldie. So that's pretty cool. I use that in school as well. Have some fond memories of it and some not so fond memories. But okay, so we've got people coming in. Sorta is your first exposure. Excellent. I'm just glad that we have some people like that. Charlie for short. Okay, sweet. I'll try and remember that. Spend a month on Maya. It sounds like we have a decent amount of people coming. I used to work with Max and Maya before. I used to be a game asset modeler and mocap post processor. Okay, Killzone. So you're a Blender noob, but you're not a 3D noob. Then you're in good shape. That's going to be the easiest way to transition, I think, being exposed to the concepts already. And it sounds like we have a lot of that, people transitioning. So that's an interesting thing for me to observe, a lot of transitioners. But a couple brand new. Awesome. All right, so let's say you just get into Blender and you see this. If you're coming from other software, you're probably like, "What? Why do I already have things in my scene? Oh, wait a minute. Why did this crosshair thing pop up? I just realized you can't see my mouse. Let me see if I can change that. Window capture. Nuts. I don't see an option for showing my mouse with OBS. Oh man, that's really lame. All right, let me know if that's annoying, because I don't know, it can be kind of important to see where the mouse is at times. Yeah, so let me know in the chat if that's a problem. I can try and set something else up if need be. Okay, so yeah, you can't see my mouse cursor, but you can see the effects. That's kind of lame. All right, so you're into Blender, and the first thing you notice, you left click and this cursor thing pops up. I remember that annoying the mess out of me, because left click almost universally is like selection. It's like, yeah, it's a selection. It's doing something. And this in Blender, by default, left click is something weird. And actually right click is the select method. So as I right click here on the light, it's selected. Right click on the box, it's selected. So it's a bit of a debated topic, but like left click select versus right click select, but the default is for right click select, and that is very weird. Question here from Leona: is there a thing in Blender where you can see the buttons pressed? I know Blender Guru uses it. Oh, okay. Let's see. It used to be in here. Let me see if I can turn it on. So it was this thing called screencast keys, and I don't, yeah, they removed it at some point, and so we stopped using it for teaching, and I know that that's annoying. It can be annoying. The reason we turned it off intentionally was it forced us as teachers to explain the hotkey and also where to find it in the menu. So far, we're not doing anything that's menu based. So anyway, I would have to download the add-on again and install that to turn on the screencast keys so you can see what buttons I'm pressing. It's kind of our protocol to not do that, but it means I've just got to do a really good job explaining to you the tools and where to find them in the menus. So back to right click left select versus left click select. That's a real big hurdle when you first start off, because if you're coming from any other software, you're expecting left click to be select, and it's not that way. Personally, I changed that right away. I don't recommend changing a lot of default things in Blender, but that was one thing that I did change. So I'll show you how to do that, because I'm going to be teaching that way. And if you stay on right click select, it can just get a little confusing. Maybe at least learning with me, try and do left click select. It's true. Omar mentioned back when we did screencast keys, I frequently started recording without clicking the button, without turning it on, and I would always say I forgot to turn on screencast keys. So it's nice now that I don't have to say that anymore. We just don't turn it on. I ran into an issue from James Cooper. I ran into an issue with my new computer. Is that installed programs were overriding the Blender hotkeys? Oh, okay. So it sounds like you had programs not Blender related that overtook some hotkeys that messed with Blender. I've not had that experience. I don't use a lot of system hotkeys, and so I've never really run into that issue. But it's definitely something to be aware of, I guess, for anyone else. If the hotkeys aren't working, check to see if you have system hotkeys that are overriding. So yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that, James. All right, where was I? Okay, left click. Okay, I'm showing you how to change left click select. All right, so if you go to File, User Preferences, this window will pop up, and in the Input tab, on the left side, you'll see Select With, and Right is enabled. I'm going to choose Left, and I'm also going to, I like to invert the mouse zoom direction as well as the wheel. Those are the two things that I change right off the bat. And if you want to stay that way, each time you open Blender, choose Save User Settings, and that kind of overwrites the config file. And so now I can zoom in the way that I like, and clicking with my left mouse button is very comfortable, familiar behavior. Yeah, I did that way on at the beginning. It's never caused a bunch of problems. I think Lampel is in the chat, and he does use right-click select. I know I was always concerned if I was doing it wrong, but Bassam Kurdali, who's like a Blender godfather, he uses left-click select. So along with other prominent people, it's not an issue to use left-click select, and I'm going to be using it. So that's how you turn it on, and then right-click select becomes this cursor situation, and the cursor, just so you know what it is, we're not going to use it a lot now, but let me turn off. Whoops, the user preferences. There we go. So the cursor is just a point in 3D space that's a reference that can be used for modeling tools and transformation tools. It's really actually very usable, and I don't know of any other 3D software that has something like this. It's really weird out of the gate, but it's actually very, very useful once you know what it's for. So left click select, that's comfortable. And okay, first thing I want to teach you, I gotta get my head on straight, but the two big things that I want to teach in this demonstration, and also what I want you to get comfortable with over this week, is number one, viewport navigation. It's absolutely essential to finding your way around in Blender. You need to be able to orbit around and navigate through the viewport. That's very, very important. So I'm going to be teaching you that. I'm going to be encouraging you to practice that. And then basic object interaction. So beyond a viewport navigation, it's how to do things like move an object, how to rotate it, scale it, like things like that. So those are the two big things that most everything else in Blender is built upon. Saw a couple questions come in there. Where do I change the zoom direction? I just answered that in the user preferences. If you need to see that again, let me know. Let's see, Leona Hauser, any recommendation or study method for remembering all this info? Cheat sheet, flashcards, repetition until it's stuck. It's that last one. As much as that's not fun, it's repetition. That's what I want you to do this week. If you just focus on viewport navigation and basic object interaction, there's going to be several hotkeys to remember, but just keep doing them, and it'll be like second nature to me. Like when I navigate around the viewport, I mean, it's like video games. You know, once you get comfortable, you're, pressing all the right buttons that you need to perform the game play. You're not worried. You're not thinking in your head, oh, press X to reload or right trigger to fire. It just becomes natural to you. And that's the same thing with Blender. So there are cheat sheets out there. You can certainly, I never learned that way personally. So just by practice and repeating them, I mean, to do anything in Blender, you're going to have to do this viewport navigation. You're going to have to select objects and move them and translate them and all that stuff. So you won't be able to do anything until you remember those. And so this week, it's like, 7 days of you just practicing this. I think you should be comfortable if you're diligent and you practice through these. Let me see if I missed any other questions. Oh, potential OBS mouse fix. Settings general, unhide. Oh, thank you, Nathan. Let me do that real quick. Let's see. What am I looking for? Uncheck hide cursor over projections. Where is that? General hide cursor over projections. So that was unchecked. Make projectors always on top. Let's try that. Okay, no. Thank you for the tip, by the way. I'd love for you to be able to see my mouse. Video, nope. General. Ooh, I'm not seeing anything about my mouse. It's a bummer. Okay, that's a bummer. I need to use OBS a little bit more, so I apologize about the mouse. I know that's got to be annoying. If it's really annoying, I can do something else. I can instead of record the window, I can just record the screen and crop it. Maybe it is a Mac OS X issue. It could be under source options. Let's try that one more time. Let's see, there's video. There is, hotkeys? No. Stream. Not seeing anything else. Sorry about that. Something for me to put a pin in and figure out. So I should have that fixed by next time. Okay, the first thing of those two that I want you to practice is viewport navigation. So let's talk about this. The thing you want to remember is middle mouse button. That is the key to navigating the viewport. If I just middle mouse click and drag, I'm starting to orbit around my scene. And it's kind of taking the viewport camera, that's different from this one. That's just what I'm calling it, like the viewport view and perspective. And it's orbiting it around a central point. That's what orbit means. Now, if I hold Control and then middle mouse click and drag, that's zooming in and out, or it's really dollying more than it is zooming. So it's actually moving the view inward or outward. And then Shift middle mouse click, that is to pan the view. That's to move the camera side to side or up and down. And I say camera. What I mean is the viewport perspective. Don't get that confused with the actual camera over here. So that practice that middle mouse button orbiting around, Shift to pan left and right, and then Control. Okay, so I mean, now that I'm saying it, it sounds like a lot of hotkeys, but it's actually only 3, which makes sense. It's three operations. You know, orbit, zoom or dolly, sorry, and then pan. So practice those. Get very comfortable so that you're zipping around your scene like nothing ever happened. You know, if you got an object way out here, try focusing in on that object, rotating it around. The more that you like orbit around and pan, you'll notice that your view does start to center. Whereas if I try and quickly just move in one big swoop over here, zoom in, you'll see that my center point is all wonky. It's not on this object like I might have wanted. And that's another hotkey. That's the next hotkey to remember, and that is zoom to selected. So I'm going to select that. Also, let me say real quick. So there is no menu that I'm aware of. There's no menu or button for this view navigation. You literally have to memorize it in order to orbit, dolly, and pan around your view. It's just memorization, which is, now that I realize, like for new beginners, that's a pretty big frustration. There's nowhere in the user interface that really tells you how to navigate around your view. You do have the view menu down here, which gives you other options, but as far as I know, there's no orbit option, there's no dolly option. So those 3 key things you just need to memorize. And so the fourth one does have a hotkey, and it's when you want to zoom in on a certain object. So let's say I've been working on this guy right here, and then I realize I need to go work on this one. If you go down to the view menu and choose view selected, that's going to frame your camera perspective right onto that object. And as I orbit around, you can see that it's centered on that object. Alternatively, it has a hotkey, which all hotkeys, if a tool has a hotkey, it's listed beside the menu option. So view selected is number pad period. And so if I select this object, hit number pad period, I zoom in. All right, so that's 4 hotkeys, and those are pretty crucial. You know, you'll frequently want to bounce around, and even in edit mode, which we're not going to get into this week, but you can do it on a per element basis. You know, if I just want to zoom in on this face or a specific part of an object, you can do that. You know, the hotkeys apply in both contexts. Real quick, I'm going to drink a sip of water. And all right, so that is the 4 most important view alignment navigation things. Those are the 4 that I really want you to practice. There's a bunch of options in here. Another one that's useful is view all, which if we click that, no matter where an object is placed in space, it will zoom out and select everything, or frame everything in your view. Might want to explain how shortcuts only work if you're hovering over the 3D viewport. I don't even think I took that for granted. Yeah, that's absolutely true, Tom. Thank you. So yeah, hotkeys are dependent on where, now that I think about it, that's absolutely true. hotkeys are dependent on where your mouse is hovering. For example, if I am hovering over the property panel over here, you can't see my mouse. Trust me, I am. You can see me switching the context. Gosh, that's super lame. And I press number pad period, nothing happens. It doesn't zoom. I have to be hovering over the 3D view. And I mean, when I think about it, it's actually very natural for Blender to work this way, so much that I never even realized that you know, it depends on where your mouse is hovering, and it's context sensitive in that way. But thank you for that. Matthew's saying in the 3D view, 3D navigation add-on, it has the nav buttons that you're looking for. Okay, so there's an add-on that you can enable that does have those navigation buttons. Which I'm not sure if I want to go into talking about add-ons yet. I'm not sure how muddy that the water will be if I do that. But it looks like we're about an hour into the stream, so it looks like to cover what I want to, we'll go an hour and a half. I hope that's okay for people. I know someone, Killzone is here, and you know it's super. It's like early in the morning, like 3 or 4 a.m. So, real quick, I want to say, if you are here and you're at a very weird time in your time zone, and this is not convenient, thanks for being here at all. But no worries if you got to bail. I'm not really sure a good answer on what's the best time to stream. I do research on that, and you know, Twitch streamers generally it's like just pick a time and be consistent, because you can't get everybody to watch at a convenient time. But I just want to say I'm aware of that, and I'm sorry that it's not convenient for you guys. All right, so the navigation add-ons. Okay, yeah. So practice that this week. That's the big thing I want you to practice, navigating around. And one more hotkey if you want to test your memory is Shift C, which is twofold. It does the view. It does view all. So if I hit Shift C in the viewport, you'll see that it frames everything that's in my 3D scene, but it also returns the 3D cursor, to the origin of 3D space. That brings up maybe another thing we should be talking about. So you can see the cursor's up top, hit Shift C, frames everything, and moves the cursor back to the origin. Let's talk about what origin means. The grid, for one, every 3D software has a grid for the most part that I'm aware of. And this serves as a ground floor in a lot of practical situations. It shows the axes in the world, which this will become relevant very soon in this demonstration. The red line is the x-axis, the green line is the y-axis, and there's a z-axis, which is up and down, and that's blue. And if you look in the bottom left corner, which my head is covering, let me switch that real quick. Put that over here. Okay, so in the bottom left corner down here, that is that shows you what the axes are, and that is always a reference point that's there for you. Get rid of that grease pencil mark. So your axes are important, and where the axes cross is called the world origin, and that's this point right here in the middle that everything starts at. If I create a new object, don't worry about this quite yet. A new cylinder, it appears at the origin. So that's sort of, well, the origin. It's the beginning point. It's a central reference for your 3D world, your 3D space. And you know, sometimes when you've been using your 3D cursor a lot, you know, it's good to recenter that with Shift C. Okay, so as far as viewport navigation, we've got 5 hotkeys to remember. Middle mouse click for orbit. You've got control middle mouse for dollying in and out, and you've got shift middle mouse for panning the view perspective, and then the fourth one is number pad period, which frames the selected like this, and then you've also got Shift C, which is view all / return the cursor to the origin. Oh, okay. Karen saying that it's the 3rd time the video froze. Hey, I'm sorry about that. Let me try and refresh my page. I'm sorry about the freezing. I'm not sure if that's on my software side just a short refresh. Yeah, I'm not sure where that problem's causing. I'm really sorry about that. Please let me know in the chat. I can always repeat myself or you try and remedy the situation if I can. So thank you for that. Okay, cool. So we're talking about the axes and stuff like that. I've gone over the 4 hotkeys. So practice the navigation. That's going to be crucial. I can't tell you that enough. You got to be comfortable doing that stuff. And no, it's not navigating the viewport. It'll take a decent amount of work and practice, but it will not, if you're not, I'm sorry, I just saw something in the chat. Is there a way to hide the 3D cursor if needed? Was not able to find that option or tick box. Good question. And I actually remember wanting to do that when I first started Blender. It was just such a weird concept that I wanted to hide it. And no, I don't think you can. What I will do sometimes when it's annoying is I'll just move it way off in space, you know? So if you want to do that, okay, in the in panel, which should be hidden by default, is right here, hitting the in hotkey will bring that up. Also hitting this plus button right here at the top. Gosh, I'm realizing that's pretty important to see my mouse. No one seems to be complaining about it that much, but if it is a real problem, let me know if something's not making sense. But the little tiny plus tab at the top right of the viewport, that will open the in panel. And if you scroll down, there is a 3D cursor drop down, and it just tells you the exact coordinates of that 3D cursor. And just choose one of them and type in, I don't know, like 10,000 or something. And that shoots off way, way, way out into space. And it's probably not going to be that big of an issue. Actually, it's still there. I figured the clipping plane would cut that off, but it seems to not do that. Sometimes I will just move it off the way if you need to. But to my knowledge, you cannot hide the 3D cursor. But once you get used to it, you actually don't want it gone. You actually see how useful it is. Okay, so that's kind of stage 1, viewport navigation. What I was saying is that it's not going to create anything beautiful, but it's going to take a little bit of work to get comfortable navigating around, but hopefully not too much work. Just practice that, get very comfortable. I mean, create a bunch of objects, navigate around, and yeah, just get used to that. Create that, develop that muscle memory, and it's really not going to be an issue for long. Okay, that's stage 1. Stage 2 is basic object interaction. Like you've seen me already duplicate these 2 cubes, deleting them, rotating them, moving them like this. This is what I mean. This is what I mean by basic object interaction, and that's what I want to kind of go over next, because you're going to use basic object interaction to create that scene I talked about earlier, which was that basic landscape kind of thing. Yeah, like Kaj says, 3D cursor is a great tool. It really, really is. There's a hack to remove the 3D cursor, but as often as you'll use it, you'll never likely want to hide it. Exactly. Yeah, so thank you, experienced members, being that good resource. I appreciate that. That is the kind of information and answers and stuff that is very helpful. Object interaction. So like you had orbit, dolly, and what was the other one? Pan in viewport navigation, those 3 things. You also have 3 object transforms that you need to remember, and that is translation, which is moving like this. You've got rotation, and you've got scaling. These are fairly straightforward, I think, in terms of their terminology. But the hotkeys, okay, before I get to the hotkeys, first in the tool panel, which is the T key. So in the viewport properties, or in the viewport window, you've got, which is this big one when you open it up, you've got the T panel and the N panel that can be shown or hidden, T and N. T is the tool panel on the left side. And at the top of the Tools tab, you can switch tabs through here, but I'm talking about the first one. You have Translate, which you can click and drag. And you have Rotate, and you have Scale. And personally, I have never, ever used those, because Blender, whenever you start one of those operations, it remembers, or it references where your mouse is at. And you can't see this, but when I click the button, I'm in the top left, and I hit Translate, and it's just offset in an uncomfortable way. If you're following along, you can figure out what I'm talking about. I never use those options. I don't recommend using them. I recommend you learn the hotkeys, because hotkeys are going to make you faster. They're going to make you work more effectively. And effectively, that's debatable. I would say more efficiently. And one of the frustrations with Blender that I hear from new people is it's so hotkey dependent. And it is, sometimes more so than other 3D software. But when you learn it that way, you are able to work much faster. And I love it. Now once you're experienced, you end up loving it. It does make for a steep learning curve, but just stick with it, be patient throughout this week, throughout this class. And so, yeah, I do not recommend using the buttons, the transform buttons. I recommend using the hotkeys. And so if we hover over the button, that's another way to figure out the hotkey. It delivers a tooltip. You can see that the shortcut is G. Now, I think of G as grab. So I hit the G key, and now I'm moving. It enters the grab operator. And once you enter the operator, you have a couple of options. Note that I am using left-click select. So if I left-click, it completes the operation and leaves the object wherever I moved it. If I hit G again and right-click, it will cancel that operation, and the object will return to where it came from. So left-click. Okay, this is based on left-click select. So hopefully you guys can make that standard as I teach. I don't have to always say this, but left-clicking will give a thumbs up to the operator. Right-click will cancel it and say no, don't do that. So G is translate, and R is rotate. Pretty simple. And finally, S is scale. So aside from G being translate, think of it as grab, and all the hotkeys make very clear sense. In Maya and maybe Max, I can't remember Max, but in Maya it was like W, E, and R were the keys, and that made almost no sense. Yeah, R was scale, E was rotate, W was translate. Anyway, you can get used to anything, but at least these hotkeys make very clear sense. I recommend using the hotkeys for this. You also have this thing which is called a manipulator. It's common in 3D software, and it's this colorful arrow gizmo in the middle of the object. This is apparently on by default. I don't think I knew that. But you can click on any axis, and that will move it specifically on that axis, which is actually very important. And then to control the manipulator down here, this is called the header, which is actually kind of confusing. If we right click, you can see that this gives me header options, but it's on the bottom of the window. Kind of strange, but it's called the header, and this has several view options. It's where I've been getting the view properties. We also have select, not properties, but tools and buttons, add menu, add objects, and then object specific tools. So the header has a lot of important tools, and one of them is the ability to control the manipulator. And so we can see that it has enabled this button right here. Oh, you can't see it. I'm sorry, you still can't see my cursor, but you can see when I hit the button, which button I'm hitting, hopefully. It's that it looks like a manipulator, and that will enable, right now we've got the translation manipulator option, but you can hold shift and click the other three, and that will enable rotation and scale. You can have all those in one manipulator at the same time. That's pretty cool. So you can scale in a certain direction, you can rotate around a certain axis, and the manipulator is very common and familiar to people, but not it's not what I recommend. It's what I was used to with Maya, but then what I realized in Blender, when you get used to the hotkeys, is you can turn that thing off completely, and you can G and move along the x-axis. You can G, move along the y, rotate along the y, and there's no big clunky distracting manipulator. So while you can use the manipulator, I think Wayne Dixon, amazing animator, and he teaches animation for us. He uses the manipulator. Every time I open his file, the manipulator is on. But I like to not use the manipulator. It just makes the viewport a little clearer. And I think you can work faster because you don't have to click on a certain area of the screen to perform the action. And so that hotkey, you know that it's G for grab. But while I'm in the grab operator, I can hit X, and that locks it to the x-axis. Or straight from here, I can hit Y, and that will change it to the Y-axis, Z to the Z-axis. Very clear hotkeys, if you ask me, and not that hard to remember. And then R, you can do the same thing. Like essentially I'm in the transform operator, and I can switch through them fluidly. So I started with G, but before canceling or confirming the transformation, I can just switch to scale. I can switch to rotate. It's just very, very intuitive and very much a fast way to work if you choose to go that way. The manipulator has its uses, however, hotkeys are the way, really. Thank you. You agree with me, maybe a surprising amount. I thought I'd have to convince people more. Cool. Let's see. Am I missing anything else? Any questions? Hey, I just showed somebody something new. That's exciting. And for absolute beginners, there's one key advice for the 3D cursor. If you clicked accidentally anywhere and it was replaced, just hit Shift-C and you will have it again at the original. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Zolt, that is the Shift-C key. I mentioned that earlier. It was like the bonus hotkey to remember. Absolutely, that will return the cursor to the center if you've lost it. Okay, so now we get into something that gets a little complex, but it is foundational for 3D, and that's this idea of orientations, global and local, and there's a couple other ones. So whenever I'm hitting G and Z, or let's say X, I'm moving our object along the global X-axis, okay, and that is confirmed by the grid floor down here. This is always going to be global. However, if I rotate my cube just a little bit and then hit GX and then X again, so X twice for GXX, that takes us into local orientations, okay? And that is our object maintaining a local set of orientations. And that can be very, very important, very useful, especially for a modeler. So I want you to be aware of it. But it's built right there into the hotkey of the tool. So I think it's also very intuitive. If the object's rotated like this and I want to move it in its local up direction, let's say, if I overuse finger quotes, let me know. I'm suspicious that I do. But I've hit G, Z, Z, and now we're moving in the local Z. That is super important just to be aware of. And I'm going to stop there. I don't want to go too fast. So just be aware there's global axes, and I can still use global axes. So if my object's oriented weird, I can still move in global X. I can still move in global Y. Sometimes you will need to do that. But just be aware that sometimes, especially with modeling, if I wanted to move this face, like if I wanted to elongate this into a rectangle, if I hit G and then Y, it gets all wonky. Or if I hit GX, it's like, oh, that's not really what I want. But hit GX again, so GXX, and now you're moving locally. And that's a very useful tool to keep in mind. Okay, a couple more things about object orientation. Well, one being that the hotkeys work for all the transforms. So if I'm scaling, I can scale in just the Z-axis or the local Z-axis. I can rotate in just the global X or local X. So those they work for all of the types of transformations. Same hotkey, so it shouldn't be too hard to remember. Okay, I see a question from Karen. Can you please tell me what is the difference between local and global? Yes, I had hoped that I had done that, but let me try and say it again. So global axis, I didn't say this, it's the world that your objects live in, okay? So think of space, Earth is its own object, but it's in space, this ever-expanding thing. You can think of 3D space as space itself. Like, theoretically it's endless, but, the computer has to have clipping limits and stuff. But for intensive purposes, think of it as limitless. So the global orientation is based on that space. It can't be changed. Global is constant. You cannot change the global axes. And so, if you ever want to move globally, if you want to move left in the world, use GX, and you'll go left and right in the world. So that's global, and it'll always stay the same. If you want to use local, let's say for this object, it has its own relative set of axes, its own left, right? So, okay, here's a way to think of it. You have north, south, east, and west. Those are always the same, and they're a global set of reference points and directions. But if you are facing forward and you say forward is north, but then you rotate and look to the right, your local north looking forward is no longer global north. Okay, so that's what this is. I've rotated our object so it no longer coincides with the global space, but it maintains its local space. So GXX, that's how we get into local. And so this is left and right for this specific object. Okay, so thank you, Tom. There's a detailed explanation of the difference. Sometimes, I don't know what it is that can just make it click. It can be a little confusing to understand in general, like these kind of conceptual things, but let me know if that makes it a little more clear for you. Okay, so Kaj is saying, do you have maybe the monkey face to show direction? That's a good idea. I keep using the cube because a cube is a very good object for showing these local directions since it has flat sides that face the directions exactly. But, let's say you have a character that you're working with. Let's see, not an armature, the mesh monkey is an option here. And so we've got a monkey and it's looking forward. The monkey's forward direction is down the y-axis, okay? So that's how it starts. But if I rotate around, the monkey is looking, this direction, which is, I don't know, let's say if I'm looking from top down, this direction is north, this direction is south. This monkey is looking southeast, right? But, so that's where the monkey is looking in context of the world, but the monkey is actually, for itself, this is looking forward. And so it's its local y-axis. Okay? Please let me know if that's helping. Tomas is asking, can local and global mismatch with anything else other than rotation? Mismatch. Trying to understand maybe what you mean by that. Is there another purpose rather than just rotation? Absolutely, if that's what you're asking. So one thing that's very common understanding local axes is mirroring an object using the mirror modifier. So let's say I delete half of the monkey head. And this gets into mesh modeling. We'll get into that later. Right now, I'm just trying to explain something. And we add a modifier, the mirror modifier. Okay, so what that does is simply duplicates the mesh to the other side. But it gives us options like the x-axis, that's on by default. But you'll notice it's doing that according to the local x-axis of the object. The point of the mirror modifier is like now I get the other side for free whenever I modify the mesh. It's a super common tool to use, but it's dependent on local axis over global. And anyway, I hope that's helping. Scaling gimbal lock. Gimbal lock. Good Lord, that's one of the hardest things. I still don't think I understand it completely. I've watched many videos on it. I was taught it at school. That is really never an issue until animation, and even still animation. I'm not going to speak too much. I'm not a big animator, but Wayne would be the person to ask. Gimbal lock. He explains it in some of his courses, and in one of his courses especially, he does a whole gimbal lock description. I don't know off the top of my head exactly which course that's in, but anyway, I'm kind of reaching the limit on how I know how to explain global and local. Hope that's a little clearer. Let me see if I miss anything else. So philosophical, it's funny. Killzone, you mentioned that it's philosophical. I think this is some of the stuff that turns people off whenever they watch like Lord of the Rings and they're like, oh, Gollum is so cool, or that fire monster dragon is so cool. Like I want to be able to do that. And they Google and they find Blender or something, and And what they don't realize is you have to understand these weird concepts like global axis versus local axis, because practically, let me do something real quick. I'll open a scene here. Practically, when building a character like this, I very intentionally use local axes for this object, for example. A lot of these pieces, if I hit G, Z, Z, the local z-axis is facing directly up and down this object, even though according to the character rotation, the global orientation, it's not facing up and down. But because I do that, I can have symmetry built into this specific object, and all the other objects as well. So local versus global is very important, and it has its super practical uses. Without it, it would just be a real problem to try and model this exactly the same on the front and back sides. I want this piece to be symmetrical. Anyway, but yeah, these concepts I think is what people get exposed to, and they're like, wait a minute, this is oh wait a minute, that's not what I was after. Let me just start from a new scene. Load factory settings. Yeah, some of these philosophical underlying concepts, I think people get to them and are like, okay, I didn't sign up for this. I'm out of here. But that's why I want to keep this week's focus pretty small. I want you to focus on just navigating, getting around the viewport, and I want you to focus on selecting objects, moving them, scaling them, and then zoom in on it. Like just make your way around the viewport. So I've got about 10 minutes left. And what I want to try and wrap up this demonstration and prepare you for creating your own scene, which you should be able to do after you watch the Blender Basics. But also, since I set up, since I loaded factory settings, I've got to change my input back to left-click select and invert the mouse zoom. I don't often revert to factory settings. I'm just doing that for demonstration purposes. All right, so we're back to my recommended personal setup for navigation. Yeah, that's what I want you to do. And the assignment will require you to do this, and it's to create a simple scene. All right, so we've got our objects here, and frankly, let me backtrack a little bit. So when you first open Blender, it gives you the cube, it gives you a camera, and it gives you a light, all three types of objects by default. And I think the reason it does this is so when you hit render, you actually have something to see. Without those objects, if you hit render, you got nothing. So I think that's why they even, oh, you can't even render without a camera. I forgot about that. So it's weird to have those objects in there by default, and that's different from other software. I don't think other software does that, not in my experience. It's always just a blank scene with the grid. Okay, work calls. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks for coming, Char, I believe, and thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Have a good one. So let me quickly try and wrap up. Sorry if I ignore the chat for a little bit. I don't want to. I want to answer people's questions. So object origin point is always 0, 0, 0 in local space. In local space, it's always 0. Yes. Yeah. I think technically yes. The object is always. Is that right? We can only see. Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks. Let me hide the user preference. I might not do this record the window thing again, because like window or the user preferences is a separate window. I've got to make that a separate layer in OBS. Just kind of talking out loud. I might readdress how I do this in the future, but user preferences, I'm losing track of where I am. Okay, so the origin point in local space, yeah, that is always 0, 0, 0, I believe. I think. So getting a little, I don't want, that's going to distract me a little bit too much. Maybe we can talk about that. I really hope I'm not sounding really dumb. No, not at all. You're not sounding dumb at all. I'm trying to think, like, is that a technicality that's a little weird? I'm not confusing the home stream. Yes, it is for local space. The only thing that why I didn't say like a hard yes, or why I was not considering a hard yes, is something that I've not talked about. I forget some of these core concepts that are actually fairly deep to understand. Every object has an object origin, not to be confused with the world origin. But this little orange dot, let me turn off the manipulator. This orange dot that every object has, you can see here the orange dot is at the back of the camera. It's in the center of the light. That orange dot is the object origin. And when I rotate, by default, I'm rotating around that object origin. But I can move that object origin to be wherever I want. For example, let's say I want it to be at the 3D cursor. That's another thing that 3D cursor is very useful for. And there are very specific instances where you want to move the object. Let me do a very practical example. Let's say I want to mirror this object, but not simply along its horizon like this, its local horizon, but I want to do it along the, like I kind of want there to be another cube on the left side, okay? So if I want to move the origin essentially to the cursor, so I can hit Object, Snap Cursor, nuts. Sorry, I'm getting a little confused. This isn't where I meant to go, and it's kind of throwing me off. Where is it? What am I trying to do? Transform. Yeah, origin to 3D cursor. That's what I was looking for. So now my origin is down here. It's no longer in the center of the object. And what this enables me to do is, if I add that mirror modifier, now I've got 2 cubes, and it's using this origin as the horizon. Okay, so that's a reason you might want to move the origin. And why am I talking about the origin now? Oh man, I feel like I'm getting off the rails. But so the origin, let me undo that. That's a reason you'd want to move the origin, and I completely forgot why I wanted to tell you that. I forgot. I wonder if Captain of Disillusion watches the streams. I'm fascinated by that guy, personally. It's kind of a rabbit hole, but I cannot remember why I wanted to tell you about the object origin, moving it. Oh, I remember now. Someone was asking about local space. Is it always local? So when you move the object origin, I don't know if that's still 0, 0, 0, if that makes sense. Anyway, that was kind of a super long way to answer that. What I want to do last, what I want to wrap up in the next 3 minutes is I want to tell you about the assignment. Okay, I'm going to try and ignore the chat a little bit. I don't mean to ignore your questions. I just want to, give you a good send-off for how to accomplish the homework assignment. And so it's going to be building a scene of any type, whether you want it to be a weird car or a weird character. I say weird, just a character or your living room, a landscape scene, whatever you want. Create it just by using primitives. Primitive shapes are the objects that are available by default. So in the add menu down here, look under mesh, and you have a plane, you have a cube, a circle, UV sphere, you have an icosphere, cylinder, cone, torus, a grid, and then a monkey. You got a bunch of options. I want you to play with them and create a scene out of them. So far, we've only been using the cube. Okay, so let's say that I create the cube, and I want this to be a simple house. I'm not going to worry about snapping right now, but I kind of put it on the grid floor. I move it up in Z and just place it on the grid as close to being on the grid as I can. So that's the structure of the house, but I need a roof. Well, what would be great for that? Let's look in our objects. We've got mesh, a cone, that might work. Let's click cone. And yeah, I mean, that'll work good enough for me. Let's scale it so that it's big enough to cover the house as if it's a roof. But then I want to scale it down in Z so that it's not quite such a steep slope. All right, there's a simple house. What about the land? Well, a plain, that makes sense. But I mean, maybe it doesn't have to be so boring. Maybe we can have some hills. How about, oh, by the way, the hotkey for the add menu is Shift A. Shift A for add, if you will. And right there, you've got access to this menu if you don't want to come all the way down here every time. Shift A, mesh. Let's do a UV sphere or an icosphere. I'm not going to go into really the differences between the primitives. Just play around with them and until you get what you need. So let's scale this down. You know, maybe that's like a hill. Kind of weird looking hill. But by scaling it down, it makes it a little less extreme. Duplicating it, that's another, let's say that's the bonus of this particular set of object interaction techniques is Shift D, which is the duplicate. You can find that in the object, duplicate, where is that? Duplicate objects, Shift D. And I can just kind of build up a little system of hills back here, use a UV sphere if I want. So this is what I mean by building a scene from primitives. And all this is doing, it's forcing me to navigate around the view and get comfortable doing that. It's forcing me to interact with our, this is a really goofy scene, but it's forcing me to modify objects, scaling them, rotating them. And those are the key things I want you to get comfortable with this week. So that's the assignment. You can, if you know how to add color and get into the materials and stuff, you can do that. There's not really too many restrictions in this, but for beginners, I at least want you to be able to do that and navigate around the viewport, create objects, and modify their transforms. All right, so that's kind of all that I wanted to cover for this first class stream. Let me look through the chat. Let me see if I've missed any good questions to answer. Let's see. I don't think so. You're explaining local origin. Okay. Helping me remember where I was at. Thank you for that. Objects added some. Good reason for not hiding it. Okay. Oh, yes, Scott, thank you for that. Another reason to not hide the 3D cursor is objects, whenever you add an object, it's automatically placed at the cursor. So I put the cursor up here, add a new mesh cube, and that's where it appears. If we've got it way off in space, like I said to do earlier, to get it out of the way, which this has bitten me in the butt a couple times, and then I add a new torus, I'm like, crap, where'd the torus go? And even more so, if you can still see the cursor, but the object is way beyond the clipping plane, which is something I haven't explained. But it basically means the 3D space right here, the clipping plane, you have to tell the computer how far to render objects. And anything beyond that distance, it will not render. And this is how because if it just went on for infinity, your computer would constantly be calculating that and it would blow up and explode. So we have to tell it a limit. And so if my cursor's way off there in space and I create an object, it literally looks like my object is not created. And that's a big problem. So, I mean, to remedy this situation, I'm going to hit Alt-G, which brings us to one more thing I meant to cover. Nuts. I still have some time, if y'all don't mind going over a little bit. But Alt-G, that cleared my transforms. Okay, so the object was way out there where the 3D cursor is. Alt-G told all my transforms to go back to 0. And what I mean by that, in the view panel at the top, you have your transform data. Okay, and this tells us that my torus is 10,000 units in the X direction. That's way off there with that 3D cursor. If I hit Alt-G, everything goes back to 0, which places 0, 0, 0 is global space, and it places it at the origin. So that's how you can recover objects. I always wondered what the limit on the viewport. Maybe I can do a few city blocks to scale. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not sure, you know, what the 1,000 unit clip scale is in like real numbers. Man, everything that I say, I'm like, oh, I need to explain that. Oh, I need to explain that. It's reminding me how complex of a thing Blender is to explain. But I'm trying to keep it focused. And so this may be too far beyond for this week, but basically, if you ever want to return an object to its original spot. It remembers its original spot based on this transform data. So it remembers when I move my object, it remembers that relatively I'm 11.6 units away from where I started in the X direction. And same thing for the Y and Z. If I want to get back to where it started, hit Alt G, that will clear the G for grab the translation values. And you can see it's right down here where it started. Rotation, it gives that data in degrees. Alt R, as you can probably guess, that will clear those rotations. And then S for scale, instead of going down to 0, it goes down to 1. Alt S will take those values back down to 1 because scaling to 0 is like not existing. It's a really weird thing to do. So I'm going to stop myself, even though I've said a couple things that made me realize, the stuff I should probably explain at some point, clipping, plane, and stuff like that. I'm going to stop there, and that's what I want you to focus on this week. Don't overwhelm yourself. Just create a simple scene from primitive shapes, and take a screenshot of that. Submit it as homework to the community thread. Now, something else about that community thread is I want it to be there to be a distinction. So if you do homework, I'm gonna do a post about this today. So don't worry if this isn't clear in the stream. But I want you to post like with a title. This is homework for week 1. Put that big and bold at the top, and then say whatever you need to about it if you need to say anything, and then submit the image. Just so that I can stay a little bit organized as far as what is this image about? Oh, it's a homework assignment. And is there anything else? I don't think so. If you've got any questions, last minute questions, let me know. Scott, you're asking, so stay in object mode for the assignment, no editing. If you know about edit mode, go for it, I guess. Like, it sounds like maybe you're more experienced and you know what to do in edit mode. We're going to get into edit mode next week, but there's no limits. If you want to create an elaborate environment scene, go ahead. I won't necessarily think of that as showing off or whatever. I don't know what beginners would think, but for beginners who are, the purpose of the assignment, I would say stay in object mode. Maybe avoid materials and trying to color your scene, and just focus on those two things. I'm going to say it again over and over and over. Navigating the viewport, and number 2, basic object transforms and interaction. Last thing, deleting an object, the hotkey is X. I realize that's something I did several times and never said. That's the X hotkey. It'll just ask you if it's okay to delete. These things hopefully it can make sense to you where to find them. Everything I've been doing for viewport navigation has been in the this view menu, except for those 3 key ones, which I've already talked about, that don't have a spot in the menu. There's selection options that I have not covered yet if you want to explore those. My point being that the header menus down here, if you are confused on like, well, how did he delete something? I remember him doing that, but he didn't explain it, or anything relating to object interaction, look at the object menu. It's probably going to be there. But at this point, after the demonstration, I'm hoping you understand that this is the place to look. Okay, we've not covered much of the UI, but just the viewport. So anyway, I feel like I got a little off the rails with the explanation, but yeah, that's gonna wrap up the class. Thank you for watching. I wanted to see, well, we almost had 40 people watching. That's awesome. We had 65 RSVPs. 40 people watch. I mean, that's a pretty good class. I would love to see that number stay there so that we can all learn together. Please submit your homework assignments. Be active in that thread. Since I don't have an official system for the class yet, like I don't have an official registration page or data on the students that are officially enrolled in the class, the only way I'm really going to know that you're participating is by being active in the community thread and showing up for the streams, but primarily the community thread, because some people it might be in the middle of the night their time and they're not able to make the streams. Understandable, but be active in the community thread, and that's how I'm going to see who's active. I'm going to probably gravitate to people who are active, and that's how you're going to learn, just by being active there. So some of the onus is on, a lot of the onus is on you to still be active yourself. You know, there's no official system keeping you active. Awesome. All right. So I'm not going to be out of touch throughout this whole month. I'm going to be in that community thread. If you have questions, send them to me there, or ask them in general. And some of the experienced users, hopefully you will be prowling there, and prowling, that's a weird word. You'll be hovering there and can answer. But every day I'm going to be checking that community thread for questions to answer, critiques to give, advice, you know, whatever. Especially during work hours, you know, like 9 to 6, I'm going to be in that thread. So I'm not going to be out of touch. When in doubt, go to the community thread. When in doubt about anything in the class, go there and ask. Awesome. I think I've covered the bases that I wanted to. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, I will definitely see you next week, but I'll also see you in the community thread. So goodbye.